Hey guys, it's Taran and welcome to the On Track channel and to the 2022 race ratings for the British Grand Prix. So a very warm welcome to the Great Britain Race Ratings, the series taking a more chilled out look at the driver performances. As always, spoilers ahead if you've not seen or heard about the results from the past weekend, and do make sure you give the video a thumbs up if you enjoy it, and subscribe down below for more F1 content every week. It always helps the channel out. Now with those two things out of the way, let's get into it. On to the result, and what a race we had. Carlos Sainz, the eventual winner, takes his first win in his 150th start. That will really mean a lot for him. In behind, a great recovery from Perez, and then Lewis Hamilton rounding out the podium, a much more encouraging weekend for Mercedes. Leclerc then in fourth, and not for the first time this year, question marks on Ferrari and what goes on with the team strategists. And then in behind, Alonso and Norris best of the rest with Verstappen in seventh, issues with his car for most of the race. Mick Schumacher, he picks up his first points in F1 in 8th, very happy for him, and then Vettel and Kevin Magnussen rounding out the top 10. Now, onto the race, and what a race it was, really something special this year at Silverstone. I'll start at the beginning, and obviously, big incident on lap 1, lots of cars involved, very glad to hear that the likes of Albon and Zhou are okay. It's never nice to see a big incident, especially the way the Alfa Romeo flipped over and into the fence, but yeah, very glad that they are okay. And then after the restart, where to begin? We had overtakes and some collisions before the Ferraris and Verstappen pulled a gap, and then Sainz made a mistake, Verstappen got through, before the issues with his car, the whole Ferrari team orders, or lack of team orders as it turned out, with Hamilton catching them, then the pit stops, Leclerc being allowed past and Hamilton catching them both towards the end, before Ocon's Alpine decided to shake things up even further by dying on the old pit straight, which brought out a safety car, and then 10 laps or so of just simply amazing racing. Both Ferraris going at each other, Perez fighting with Leclerc and Hamilton, some brilliant racing there. I think that battle between those three is some of the best racing I've definitely seen this year, and honestly in some of my time watching F1. But by the end of it, the person who came out on top was Carlos Sainz. So now the ratings, starting with you guys, and I will just say now, this race has made me realise that I might need to adjust how the poll is done, as combining the two values assumes a split between the two, and I feel like there were probably more 10s than 9s for this one. So take this one with a little bit of a pinch of salt, as it works out as a 9.1 overall, which is still by far the highest of the season, and to make it up to any of you guys thinking 10, that's what I've gone with. The race had everything, crazy starts, battles in so many places, strategy there too, the most potential winners I think we've had all year, and on the whole, best race of the year so far, and worthy of the first 10 on the channel. Also, just a heads up for the ratings, from this race, gonna try and be a little harsher when drivers don't do too well, so bear that in mind if some of the ratings are just a little bit lower than usual. On to the teams, and first up is Alfa Romeo, and no points for them, a double DNF, one failure and one crash, which we'll get into. So first up Zhou, and as I said earlier, it's great to see he was okay, a very scary looking incident. I don't think I felt that way, kind of seeing it live since probably maybe Grosjean's crash. Not quite the same level, but a similar sort of feeling, where you just sort of see it live and you kind of hold your breath a little bit. You know, the car's flipped over, been sent upside down onto the gravel before sort of being flung into the catch fencing. But obviously none of that his fault, so for a rating, it's just a not applicable one, simply glad that he's okay. Then on to Valtteri, and only managed to do 20 laps or so as he had to retire with I believe a gearbox issue. I feel like that might be the most said phrase this year, that Alfa Romeo have had to retire a car because of reliability. But in those 20 laps or so, he got past Ricciardo and then spent every single one of the remaining laps, bar one I think, behind Latifi, and the only reason he was ahead of the Williams was because Nicky pitted. So when I look at what he did do, all I'm kind of seeing is him not being able to overtake a much slower car. You know, he was within DRS range the whole time and just couldn't make an overtake. So I think ratings-wise, Valtteri is going to be the victim of the slightly harsher ratings, so instead of a 4.5 or a 5, it's going to be a 4. He just couldn't get past, and given Latifi pitted to stop an undercut, I wouldn't be surprised if Bottas stayed behind for much of the race if he was still in it. Next up, AlphaTauri, and while not a double DNF, it may as well have been for the team, with one car not finishing and the other coming last of the finishers. Drivers wise, I'll start with Gasly, and we're still yet to have someone that finished the race, as like Bottas, he retired midway through. lap 28 to be more precise. Now, after the red flag, he was actually running in 7th, did have pressure from Tsunoda behind, which then turned into Tsunoda taking him out basically. And after that, nothing was really going to be happening for Pierre. He had to pit later too, a black and orange flag for damage. Also, after the Tsunoda collision, just sort of sat a few seconds off of Magnussen a bit further back. Ratings wise, he did 28 laps, so I think I'll give him one. You know, P7 until his teammate took him out, and nothing could really be done after that. And then Tsunoda, who was running right behind Gasly in 8th, and then just into turn 3, tried a late move up the inside. Looks like he locked the rears a little, or lost the rear of the car, which not only spun him round, but took Gasly out as well. You know, cardinal sin colliding with your teammate. And from there, where you're looking at a P7, P8, maybe P6, P7 with Verstappen lower down later in the race, it's not great. So yeah, it's a big error from him, and from there I think he had damage, had no pace whatsoever, and even on soft tyres after the safety car was like 8 or 9 seconds back of 13th place in the end. So ratings wise, I think it's going to be something like a 2.5 for Yuki. He's had a good start, a good first couple of laps, and then just wrecked not only his race, but Gasly's and the team's as well. Next up, Williams, and while no points, probably a little bit more encouraging of a weekend than has been the case the past few weeks. I'll start with Albon, who through no fault of his own was out of the race before turn 1, so it's going to be a not applicable rating for him. In terms of the crash, glad he's okay in general. He was taken for precautionary checks, but on the whole is alright. And his crash was sort of a chain reaction from the Zhou incident, where Albon has seen all the smoke and dust and slowed down, and then behind him Seb Vettel has just gone straight into the back of him. So nothing Alex could have really done there. And then as he's hit the wall and come across the track, he's also been hit by Ocon and Tsunoda, so a big impact for him. Glad that he's okay, but yeah, not applicable rating. Then Latifi, and possibly I would argue his best performance maybe ever. I know he got points last year in Hungary, but this time out, qualified P10 and was racing in that position or thereabouts for quite some time. Holding up cars, and while yes, it's a train, if you're in a slower car and you're holding everyone up, you as the driver are doing a good job. Also, the eventual finish of P12 means that he has now finally moved above Nico Hülkenberg and is no longer 21st in the championship. So for a rating, I think it'll be a 7.5 for Latifi. Definitely his best performance, helped probably by how many cars were out of it, but still on the whole a really solid job. Next up, Aston Martin, and a few more points picked up, but in the standings dropped back into 9th place, so maybe not as great as it first seems. I'll start with Lance, who after getting up to 14th initially was back down to 17th for the second start, and made up a couple places before the team stopped him quite early for hard tyres, and then on those hards just didn't really seem to have much pace at all. Didn't make much progress, even with others stopping later on, and then with the late safety car, the team put him on mediums I think, not softs, and so he got past Latifi into 11th, and so rating wise I think it's probably a 4 for him, again suffering from that slightly lower ratings. I think he's generally spent most of the race towards the back and just not really done much other than drive a bit slow. It may sound harsh, but that's just kind of how I've seen this one. Next up, Seb, who very nearly had his race ended on lap 1 when he hit the back of Albon, but did manage to carry on. In terms of the incident, I don't think there's anything on him there. Albon's braked in front of him and he's hit him. They did manage to get things fixed and managed to start the race again, and then he sort of pitted very early off of softs for mediums, but unlike Stroll, had very good pace from the back of the pack and was actually up into 7th place before the safety car, which yes, helped him out massively with an almost free stop, but at the end of the day you play with the cards you're dealt and he took full advantage to finish P9, which for me I think you can give a 7.5 for. When you consider how long he took his mediums, the pace he had them on and more points, helped by the safety car a little bit but a solid race overall. Next up, Haas, and definitely a much more encouraging performance this week than has been the case the past few. I'll start with Magnussen, as he I guess had the quieter race out of the pair maybe, restarted towards the back and didn't really make any inroads early on, spent much of the race with Schumacher, both sort of stuck in the Latifi train, and then the main difference for me was that he wasn't brought in for softs at the end, which meant that after the restart he just sort of slipped back a bit. Effectively he had a medium one-stop strategy after the red flag. Rating wise, I think a 6 is about right, was sort of towards the back, on par with Schumacher pace wise, maybe a bit behind. You know, he was overtaken by Mick and couldn't get back past him, and that was when K-Mag had the mediums and Schumacher was on hards, so overall a fairly average, just alright drive, probably fair for a 6. Picked up a point after being left out at the safety car as well. Then Schumacher, and first things first, points in F1, he's finally got them. Good to see, and as races go for him, a pretty good one. Started basically at the back and slowly made his way up the positions, making a move past his teammate, eventually clearing Latifi, and then on the soft tyres at the end, gained some more places and had a great battle with Max Verstappen. The two of them thankfully keeping it clean so he could pick up those points. So for Mick, it's going to be an 8. Could have been a 7.5, but if I compare it to Vettel, I'd put him just ahead, and honestly, could have got a couple more points with that Verstappen fight. Now onto McLaren, and like it has been for a while, a tale of two halves. One car up towards the front, and one, well, kind of not. And that kind of not car was Daniel Ricciardo. Well, by the end of it at least, as in the first 15 laps or so, he was running on the outskirts of the top 10, but after coming in was going around a little slowly on hard tyres, kinda like a stroll in a way. And then he had the misfortune of stopping before the safety car for softs as well, which cost him many more places than it potentially could have. After the safety car though, didn't really make any progress. I do think he had a little bit of damage though, I heard, from the rear wing, after Albon's car just clipped him on the opening lap. However, rating wise, it's probably a 4.5. Like, it wasn't horrendous or anything, but the general being far off your teammate, towards the back of the pack, not really having too much pace, and a kind of subpar finish just warrants that lower rating. So then on to Norris, and a very sort of actually quiet race, where after the restart he got past Hamilton, some lovely racing there, a great move around the outside of Luffield, but Hamilton was always going to get back past, and from there he spent the majority of the race just sort of chilling in 4th, keeping Alonso at an arm's distance, and I think had McLaren not messed up a little bit by bringing him in under the safety car a lap late, he may well have finished 5th. But P6 is still a great result, and on the whole, he looked fairly comfortably sitting there in 4th place most of the time, which for me as a rating I would say is probably an 8. Again, not crazy amazing, but still a very good, very solid race, with the position lost to Alonso kind of being on the team, not him. Next up, Alpine, and just outscoring McLaren, which is good for them, but a few reliability gremlins, meaning it was only one car to finish. Going to start with Ocon, who was involved in all the incidents in lap 1, and it looked like his front right wheel was hanging on by a thread after being hit by Albon, or maybe he hit Albon one way round or the other. But a great job by the Alpine mechanics to get it fixed and get him back into the race. And from there, he generally had good race pace. You know, he was up to P7, getting past Verstappen, when his car just died down the old pit straight. So through no fault of his own, he's missed out on some good points. I think rating-wise, a 7 is probably fair, no fault of his own on lap 1, and then generally driving a good race and moving forward before the car died. Next up, Alonso, who sort of had a similar race to Norris in a way, but just a couple seconds back, where he made up a couple places in the opening stints with Perez and Verstappen pitting as well, also made a move on Gasly to get past, which was quite nice, and then just was running in 5th, basically 2 seconds off of Norris the entire time. But then, when presented the opportunity, got past with the safety car, and at one point was looking to be challenging Hamilton, who was ahead of him. So for Alonso, a similar race to Norris gets a similar rating of an 8. Just ran a solid race, took advantage when he could, and overall definitely had the edge over his teammate pace-wise. Next up, Mercedes, and that's 2 races in a row where the car has looked very competitive and the team as a whole seems a lot more positive. I'll start with Russell, who was involved in the lap 1 crashes, and it was his car that flipped Zhou's over. Now, with the incident, he does sort of move left, the onboard shows that he looks in the mirror and knows that Gasly's there. I'm not sure if he can see Zhou as well. You know, when you've got 2 cars next to each other, it's hard to get your head turned that much, but who knows. It's not a hard move or anything left, it's just sort of gently moving his car over, sort of squeezing Gasly, and then just catches a wheel and hits Zhou, and the rest we know about. I think while no penalties is the right call for me, if there was someone more at fault, it is probably George, but definitely not anything worthy of penalising. So rating wise, it's going to get a not applicable like Albon and Zhou. Also think it was great seeing him just stop and check on Zhou with the red flag, you know, making sure that he was okay and if there's anything that he could do to help. Ultimately that meant he couldn't take his car back to the pits, but it probably wouldn't have got back there anyway. Then Hamilton, and definitely his most encouraging drive of the year, and the first time when he's genuinely looked like the win was possible. Got a great start initially, but then just an okay one second time round, and lost out to Norris before getting past a couple laps later, and chasing after the Ferraris, and on the harder tyres at the end was definitely catching and looking like he'd catch Sainz at least. But with the late safety car, lost out to Perez and then had a great battle with Leclerc, some amazing racing between those two, eventually took P3 and a podium. The pace he had in the Mercedes was really clear to see, a lot of clean air for him to set lap times in. So rating wise, I think I'm going to give him a 9.5, the only knocks being the not great opening lap restart that cost him like 3-4 seconds because he got stuck behind Norris and Perez, plus not making the most of the safety car late on, but on the whole a brilliant drive. Next up, Red Bull, and a race that just became damage limitation for both drivers, and it's probably fair to say that they did that well. I'll start with Verstappen, and it's very tricky actually because although he finished the entire race, it was effectively over for him on lap 12 when he ran over some debris which damaged the floor of the car. So I'm kind of tempted to actually give a not applicable rating because while I do think he's done very well with what he had, I'm finding it too hard to accurately sort of know how well he's actually done. For what it's worth anyway, if I did give him one, it's an 8 or an 8.5, so it's not massively affecting his average or anything like that. He also defended on the limit, I'd say, but within reason. I think if F1's going down the route of the hard racing, then yeah, that's fine, with him and Schumacher at the end and a couple of other times throughout the race. Overall, it is a good performance from Verstappen, but I just can't quite give him a definitive rating on this one. Then on to Perez, and he had a bad start on lap 1, but a good one at the restart, before being hit by Leclerc, which, while I think the blame is primarily on Leclerc, Checo does move kinda late sort of to block it out. But anyway, the damage from that forced him to pit, and while we didn't see any of his recovery, he was up to P4 before the safety car later on, and had he actually stopped there without the safety car, would have come out in, say, about 6th place, I believe, with fresh tyres and Alonso and Norris up ahead, so may well have got them and got up to P4 anyway. But with the safety car, was part of a trio that provided some amazing racing towards the end. Did jump across the track and kind of push Hamilton off at one point, but both investigated and no further action. So as a rating, it's going to be a 9 for him. It's an amazing recovery. Yes, P2 was only there because the safety car closed up the field, but even then he went out and got it, so overall it's a very good drive. And finally, Ferrari, who win a race for the first time since Australia, but definitely some questions over strategic calls and the like. I'll start with Leclerc, and on the whole, a really amazing drive. At the restart got overtaken by Perez and did sort of send his car into a gap that wasn't quite there, though I would refer to a certain Ayrton Senna quote in this instance. But on lap 1, when you have a good car, didn't really need to be quite so aggressive, and then that caused some damage. Well, not just some, but the whole end plate on the right side came off. However, still definitely had the pace over his teammate, so much so that eventually Sainz was ordered to let Leclerc go. And then we got the safety car where Ferrari just didn't bring him in for whatever reason. Big question marks there because it left him completely exposed on old hard tyres against cars with brand new softs, meaning he went from P1 to P4. But some amazing racing with Hamilton, and the move around the outside of Copse is arguably the overtake of the season. So rating wise for Leclerc, it'll be a 9.5. As considering his car was damaged, the pace was really amazing, much better than Sainz, and ultimately, had Ferrari not messed up, may well have won. That extra little bit off for him is just because that damage was kind of his fault, at least in my opinion, but otherwise an amazing drive. Then onto the race winner, Carlos Sainz, and actually one that I'm finding fairly tricky, because if we forget that he won, to be considerably slower than your teammate who's in a damaged car is quite bad. Like, the fact that the team ordered him to move over really wasn't great. It's probably fair to say that from what we saw out of him, Leclerc, Verstappen, Perez and Hamilton, if they all had cars at 100%, he's probably the 5th quickest, maybe 4th. Definitely Leclerc, Hamilton and Verstappen had more pace than him in this one, when their cars were fine. But as I like to say, it's not those that deserve it that win, but the ones that go and get it. And that's what he did with the safety car and the fresh tyres, played his own game staying close to Leclerc when the team said to drop back, and ultimately took the lead and then the win. So I think rating wise, it's probably an 8. I know it's his first win, but at the end of the day, he was definitely slower than his teammate who did have a damaged car. Still very happy to see him get his first win of his career. So that rounds out the race ratings for the British Grand Prix. Definitely the best race of the year so far, a number of great drives, and the first time we had 3 teams that all could have potentially won based on their actual race pace, so that was great to see. Then with the updated standings, lots of little movers up and down, no more than one place, with Perez, Norris, Vettel, Sainz and Zhou all up 1, and Russell, Bottas, Gasly, Magnussen and Tsunoda all down 1. Anyway, that's all for now. As mentioned before, do make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you've enjoyed and subscribe for more F1 content, along with leaving your thoughts, feedback, ratings and suggestions down in the comments below. But until next time, take care.